Hello, everybody, and welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Dr. Dan Kalish, and I'm here today to talk with you about adrenal stress programs, treatments that work. How do we know they work? Because you're going to be the third generation of practitioners to learn this. Dr. Timmons and Dr. Ilias developed these in the 70s and 80s. I learned these in the early 1990s, which dates me a little bit, but don't judge me, okay? I'm almost 60 years old in a couple of months. And now I'm teaching them to you. This is third generation passed down. They worked in the 80s, they worked in the 90s, they've worked for the last 20 years that I've been teaching these to thousands of students, and they're going to work for you. So you don't have to worry about that part. You just need to learn how to interpret the labs. And this is a three-step process. So number one, you have to order the test. And don't be a onesie twosie. When I used to work at one of these lab companies, we had these onesie twosie clients, and we were always rolling our eyes, like, who's that? Oh, it's Dr. Jones. Oh, he's a onesie twosie. That meant that they ordered like one or two labs every month, and they never learned the work. Very frustrating when you're trying to help a large volume of people. So you got to order a lot of these tests, 20 of them, 30 of them. You should be ordering at least 10 or 20 of them each month. In order to get good at interpreting them and understanding how to apply them properly, you have to have a certain volume of patients. So don't just do one or two and then give up. Do 10 or 20 and then do another 10 or 20. And then the second part is you have to learn how to interpret them. So you have to order them, you have to interpret them, and then you got to explain them to a patient. So it's a three-step process, and we have different courses at the Kalish Institute to help with all these different steps. We have lab ordering classes, which teach you how to order the lab. That means how to convince the patient to buy the test. We have lab interpretation classes like today, where I try to teach a basic, simple interpretation model so you can start to interpret them. And then we have a lot of patient communication courses where we sit down, and in fact, that's in the adrenal class, the Genova bootcamp we'll talk about in a minute, where I just actually sit down and say, here's how you present an adrenal lab finding, and just have it mapped out. Here's the first thing you do. Here's the second thing you do. Then do this, So you just have a step-by-step guide to what the heck you're going to say to that patient for the 30-minute consult that you scheduled to present their labs. So you got to learn how to order them, interpret them, and then present them to patients. Those are the three phases that we want you to get good at. So I also want to thank Genova Diagnostics. We were just out in Asheville. My team was out there a couple months ago, and we had a great time. It's a wonderful group of people, and of course, everyone knows and loves this lab. They've been around in the industry a little bit longer than I have. I've been around 31 years. They've been around maybe 40 years, or so. And so nothing but respect for Genova as a company. In fact, they're really kind of the backbone of the industry. If you look back on the 80s and 90s, when they were the lab, there weren't that many lab companies around. And certainly the industry has grown quite a bit, but Genova is still sort of a stalwart and trusted brand for all of us. So I appreciate their support. I'm going to talk just briefly about myself and my background. And then we're going to get into some slides, but I promise not too many. And then we're going to look at some actual lab reports that I've pulled up and designed programs. So my goal here is to give you just enough background information from the slides, so when we get to the lab interpretation part, you have some grounding and make some sense. I may very well skip over slides, and that's intentional because we may be short on time and I want to get to the interpretation part. So don't get nervous if I skip a slide. That's sort of like, I don't think we have time for this one, all right? So who am I? I'm Dan Kalish. I founded the Kalish Institute in 2006. We've trained over 7,000 doctors now, and that's an accomplishment of sorts, and I've had the goal since the very beginning of wanting to empower practitioners to understand how to order and interpret labs so they can have super successful practices. And that's also going to include things like the ability to work with patients on the sort of the softer skills side of things, right? The ability to work with patients in a way that you can explain the work to them and motivate them and inspire them to want to go ahead and do more with you. And I think that that's often not taught, and I think it's a pretty important area because most of the doctors that we work with that sign up for my boot camps and whatnot, they're struggling with how do I really explain this to a patient in a way that motivates that patient to want to do the testing and to want to take the supplements. And there's certain communication skills that, again, third generation, right? They work consistently with people. And you could learn these on your own, but it could take 5 or 6 years, and we can just teach them to you basically in the different courses that we have. I've worked with the Mayo Clinic. We did a research study together using the exact same protocols that we're going to talk about today, in fact. And I've worked probably the most important part of my career really was the 10 or 12 years that I worked with Richard Lord. And for those of you that don't know Richard, he's the chief scientist that developed all these tests going back to the 1960s and 70s. And so Richard and I had a very long, decade-long connection where we just worked tirelessly together with him training me in lab interpretation skills and really understanding the background for how these labs were developed, why they were developed, how the science behind this works. I'm IFM certified. I passed the test, woohoo, and I've been in practice for like a long time. So this is a moment when you want to get out your phone camera, it's probably sitting right next to you anyways, and scan that QR code. See that QR code? Scan that. Okay, you may want this later because it's going to get you $400 off the Genova Bootcamp. So we partnered with Genova and I designed a specific series of classes that are just for Genova labs and Genova customers. And we grossly discounted them as a thank you to Genova for helping us get the word out about these courses. And as a thank you for you being a Genova customer. So you get $400 off, scan that. The code is GDX24, GDX24. Take a picture of that so you don't forget. And if you want to, later on, sign up for our lab interpretation class on adrenals. It's starting in a couple of weeks. So you can register for it, get the huge discount. Thank you, Genova, for helping us do that, and get into a more advanced level of practice by learning how to do this work, okay? And we will send this out in an email if for some reason you can't figure out the QR code or it's not working for you, don't worry. You'll get an email tomorrow with all this information as well. So the goals for today are to get a broad picture of how to analyze the adrenal stress profiles, to understand a little bit about supplement program design skills, and to see how you can connect lab results with lifestyle changes. So in the work that I teach, if you guys have done any of the other courses I do, we talk a lot about systems, about body systems. And there's a neuroendocrine, GI, and then detoxification system that we're working with. And this whole idea of systems is not unique to me or unique to functional medicine at all. And one of the systems that's really important is this system that connects the adrenals or the HPA axis and the gut microbiota or microbiome, whichever term you want to use. And here's a nice research article about this. And I picked this one, it's from Frontiers in Endocrinology from last year, but because I love this diagram, this is one of those diagrams where you clearly, this is from these researchers, right? So clearly somebody sat down for like 6 months to try to make this diagram. And the goal was to put everything on one page, and they made it so that you really can't really tell what's going on at all. But I thought I would just show this because at least I can use my pointer and talk about things. So what we're talking about today is the brain regulating the HPA axis. The adrenals don't have a life of their own. They don't make their own decisions. It's not like, they're under the control of the brain. So when we say an adrenal program or adrenal fatigue or HPA axis, however you want to phrase it, we're talking about the brain sending out stress signals to activate the adrenal glands to do something. And in the midst of all this stress signaling, the gut microbiome takes a hit. And the longer that you're under adrenal stress, the more that your gut is going to be negatively impacted. Okay, so they talk about this in this endocrinology journal. This is something that we see in practice in every single patient. The more distressed their adrenals are, the more messed up their gut is going to be. And so the punchline to this slide is that if you're doing adrenal testing and you're starting to get good at it, and you've got a few patients, let's say 30% of the people you're working with just don't seem to respond, those are going to be the people that have a major gut problems. So you're also going to need to order a GI effects test from Genova, GI effects test from Genova to complement that adrenal test. And in fact, in the mentorship program that I teach, every case that we review in mentorship, the advanced doctors do an adrenal and a GI and a metabolomics test on every patient, those three. That's the basic workup. So we're teaching these one at a time, but I just want you to get the bigger picture that there's a connection between these systems. And if you just approach functional medicine from a perspective of, oh, I'm just going to do an adrenal test and then hope things work out, it's not going to go very well. body systems. So body system 1, hormones, mitochondria, brain, I call that neuroendocrine. Body system 2, the microbiome, the GI organs, the GI pathogens that we need to treat. Body system 3, detox, oxidative stress, methylation, nutrient replacement. So this is my rough breakdown of how I teach it. And this is how we approach it in terms of clinical program design too. So we always start with body system 1, then we segue to 2, and then 3 at the end of an overall treatment program. However, this is a big however, when we say we're starting with the adrenals, that's code word, the secret code for we're starting with lifestyle, okay? Because the adrenal labs tell you about the amount of stress the person's been under because of diet, lack of exercise, sleep problems, lack of a spiritual connection, emotional distress. And so part of the adrenal programs that we start with on every case, if not the bulk of them, probably 75, 80% of the program is lifestyle. Diet, exercise, sleep, meditation, those 4 things. So when I say start with the adrenals before we do GI, I mean start with lifestyle. You get that dialed in for a month or 2, then you go on and do the GI protocols. And then when the GI is better, you can do detox. That's the 3 body systems approach. And here's the same thing represented in a graphic. Neuroendocrine GI detox. Systems medicine is becoming a thing. You can get a master's degree at Georgetown. I wish I had the time to do this because I would totally take this class. And then I like the way that they put it in here. The last sentence here, well, this is a new type of physician. It's like, well, I don't know. We've been doing it in functional medicine since the 60s. But anyways, a new type of physician, a new type of biomedical scientist, one with a grasp of modern computational sciences and omic technologies. And this is exactly what a metabolomics and or you could a NutriVal test is, and what we're doing with the microbiome, right? It's genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, microbiomomics, if you want to make up a term there. Okay, this is exactly what we're doing, and it's becoming like a thing in regular medicine. In fact, and thank goodness for that. Doctors are starting to see that there's a whole person here and a whole system. In Chinese medicine, they've been doing this for, depending on who you talk to, somewhere between at least 5 or 10,000 years. They've had these systems in Chinese medicine. So those of you that are acupuncturists are probably on your phones right now, checking your email, because systems is like inherent in Chinese medicine. You guys learned this in acupuncture college, but for a lot of us, it's a new thing. In functional medicine, IFM designed the functional medicine matrix. These are the body systems that are used by a lot of the systems medicine, conventional physicians, but the point is that we have to look at these integrated systems together. So the 3 essential labs, adrenals we're talking about today, but also GI and organic acids. You want to do those. And at Genova, the GI test is called GI effects, and the organic acids is referred to as metabolomics, or if you want to make your life complicated, you can do a NutriVal. The complication is with the NutriVal, you have to do a blood draw. So metabolomics for organic acids from Genova, or a NutriVal if you want the more complex test. Okay. So we want to do these workups, right? These 3 body systems, and that's what we're going to get into today. One final thought before we get into the whole HPA axis thing, which is that there's an order of importance for cell functioning and survival, and then there's an order of importance in which we have to address things through treatment, and they're not the same. So, like for example, if you're going to have like a debate about the most important body processes in functional medicine, they'd be on the left-hand side there in the order in which they're the most important. And adrenals are at the bottom. You can be stressed out and really live for a really long time, I mean, a lot of people do, but if your glutathione levels really tank, you're not going to be on this planet for that much longer because your cells are going to start to die and then the tissues and organs are going to fail. Same with methylation. So we don't treat things in the order of importance necessarily. We treat things in the order in which treatments go well, with lifestyle, then adrenals, ... I just wanted to point that out because just because I say start with adrenals doesn't mean they're the most important thing. It's that we're starting with lifestyle when we design a good quality functional medicine program, right? Now, there's a process to all this, which we're going to follow, okay? And it's a little complicated, but not too bad. And today, hopefully, I'll try to get that out, okay? Let's see here. There is determining what stage of the HPA axis dysfunction that is existing. You don't have to really figure this out right away necessarily, but in the next few months, you should figure this out. Are they stage 1, 2, or 3? It takes people a month or two to figure that out because there's some people that are in between stages and whatnot. You want to know how to design a 6-month treatment protocol, okay? And then you want to figure out what stages of GI dysfunction are present. If you go on and do GI testing, then GI treatments, and then you want to eventually combine and the adrenals and the GI protocols together and then start to retest people. So very often people will pair together an adrenal and a GI program. In fact, we have a class coming up on this specifically. It's one of our level 2 courses in April, I think, which is about how to integrate adrenal and GI programs together. So if somebody that may be more advanced, you may want to sign up for that level 2 boot camp to learn how to integrate these programs together. If you're more just starting with this, then the adrenal class that's part of this special offer would be more appropriate, okay? And then there's another big picture concept, and I guess there's two big picture concepts I try to get across today. One of them is that we're restoring the HPA axis, that's the goal, and that is restoring the connections between the brain and the adrenal glands. So when someone is stressed for long enough, that constant signal to make more cortisol starts to not provide normal feedback. And so your body doesn't turn it off. You just stay stuck in this sort of hyper-excited, hyper-stressed state. Even when you're sleeping, even when you're not particularly stressed, you just stay stuck in a feedback loop system that's sort of broken. And what we're trying to do here with these protocols is reset that feedback loop, okay, so that the body can start to function normally again. There's a study that we did with Sue Cutshall and Larry Bergstrom at Mayo Clinic I mentioned earlier. We can send, you can just Google this and probably it'll pop up, but we have the PDFs too. And in this study, we looked at 25 women who were in high stress situation. We did adrenal and GI testing on them and then showed that over the 6-month program, not all, but most of them got better. You know, the results were pretty positive. So this stuff actually works. You know, I think it's more important that we've proven this in our practices for the last 40 or 50 years, but you know, you could prove it on a scientific research study too if you really need to. This is a list of the supplements that you should know how to use easily. So if I say products I use for the adrenals, you should say DHEA, pregnenolone, ashwagandha, rhodiola, ginseng, phosphorine for high cortisol, licorice root for low cortisol only, adrenal glandulars sometimes, but not for vegans, vitamin C for sure, and then B vitamins, especially B5, and then the minerals like magnesium, and you got to do blood sugar support, okay? So the lab testing will tell you which of these products and in what dosages and how to arrange the program, but this is the menu from which you're picking, okay? So for each case, you're not going to use all of these, but for each case, you're going to pick anywhere from, let's say, 3 to 5 of these, depending on what the lab results show. If you have high cortisol, you use phosphorine. If you have low cortisols, you don't. If you have low cortisols, you use licorice root. You wouldn't want to give someone a lot of phosphorine if their cortisols are already low because it drives cortisol low. You kind of get the idea there, right? So each one of these has its place in a program, and eventually you can learn how to use each of these products in different ways for different patients based on the labs. But this is a pretty comprehensive list of what you end up using overall. And here's an example of every one of those products altogether. This is not a program you would ever design because, but this is just to show you, you know, dosage ranges and how these things can work. So again, in a typical program, you'd probably use 3 to 5 of these products, depending on what the labs say, okay? But not all these. But that's a comprehensive picture. It's just a list of all of them in one place. So then, when we say that there's a lot of stress, the concern is that the patient is in a catabolic, not anabolic state, meaning that they're breaking tissues down and they're stuck in this overly catabolic state. So by definition, they don't have enough time to heal. There's an analog or parallel of this with mitochondria that many of you probably know already called the cell danger response. If you haven't heard about the cell danger response, you should definitely look that up later. Just Google it. Not right now, just give me a few minutes to finish the talk. But after the talk's over, Google cell danger response, Dr. Robert Navio, and he very eloquently has laid out through his research lab at UC San Diego, sorry, how mitochondria get into this loop where they can't repair. And we're saying the exact same thing. In this case, it's a feedback loop with the brain communicating with the HPA axis, with the adrenal glands themselves through the HPA axis. In Navio's work, it's within the mitochondria itself, but the same basic concept. And then what would cause this to happen would be emotional, spiritual, dietary, inflammatory stresses, all these types of things. And then to combat that, in a moment, we'll design a couple programs where we're going to be setting up a supplement protocol with lifestyle changes based on interpreting the lab. Okay. And the key here with the adrenal programs, as I've said already, is the lifestyle change. So you want to use the lab results as a way to motivate the person to make the lifestyle changes. Yeah, and I know I already said this, but this is the hardest thing to really understand. It's not about the adrenal glands themselves. It's about the brain. And what does that mean? It's about your perception of your reality. Your perception of your reality. I was riding my bike like 5 years ago home from work on a dark street that I've ridden on 1,000 times before, and a car came racing by me and almost killed me. It like came so close. I really thought I was going to die. And if that had happened a few years before, I would have been yelling and screaming and chasing the car. I've hit cars with my bicycle lock. I've kicked in doors of cars. Maybe I had some anger problems as a young man or whatever. But when the car almost kills you and you're a cyclist, you just got to hunt him down. There's got to be some payback for it. But that car drove by me. It was as bad, but almost as close as I've ever been to dying on a bike. And I was just like, took a deep breath, shook it off, like my dog shakes it off. I just shook it off. And I was like, I hope that person's okay. And then when I got home, I realized, wow, that's a totally different response. I spent my whole life with a stress response every time someone tries to kill me with a car and a bike. And this time I had a different, right? It's a change in consciousness there. So when we say adrenal stress, it's not only the circumstances that a person finds themselves in, but it's primarily how they're responding. Okay, if you're yelling and screaming at a car, you're in a stress response. If you're just taking a deep breath and shaking it off, like my dog shakes it off when she's a little nervous, then that's a whole different level of stress response. That is not going to lead to adrenal exhaustion. It's the high state of constant stress that our consciousness is perceiving that triggers the problem. So many ways to deal with this, but I just want to focus on the concept that it's a brain problem, and this is where it's happening. It's inside the brain. Okay, and here's a nice picture of the HPA axis. So when we look at these labs in a moment, what we're saying here is that in a normal situation, you're under stress, car almost kills you, your body says, okay, game on, adrenal glands, let's make some cortisol, some DHEA, let's make epinephrine, norepinephrine, catecholamines, everything's just surging through your bloodstream. You feel that, boom, boom, boom. And then you shake it off. You're like, okay, even if you chase after the car and yell at them, okay, it's over. Now I'm home, I'm relaxed, and there's a signal that's then sent, hey, brain, you can turn it off now. We don't need that cortisol anymore. What we're worried about then is not that situation. We're worried about when the stress is chronic and the HPA axis gets engaged, it gets turned on, and the stress just keeps promoting itself. And it becomes this negative, it becomes this positive feedback loop, I guess is what you would call it, but it becomes a negative response. Rather than turning it off, your body just can't turn it off and you're stuck. And you see this on the labs. People who are stuck in this kind of a response have a problem. If you want a great book on this, Tom Gilliam's, I think, has written the best book on this subject. It's thin, it's easy to read. Take a snapshot of that. You can buy that online for $40. If you really want to know more about the adrenals and you like to read, this is like a must-read book. Okay, and Tom Gilliam's is one of the great researchers in our field, and he runs the Point Institute. His GI book, by the way, is really good too. If you're buying the adrenal book off of Tom, get the GI book from him at the same time. Those two are, you kind of, I have them right behind me on my shelf that's over my shoulder. You kind of have to have them in your office, okay? Or you're gonna look like a moron. These are like essential things, and you got to read them like 2 or 3 times, and then you're good. So, and it's not that much work. This is out of Tom's book here, by the way. And again, we're saying this HPA axis is stress response of the adrenal glands is what we're concerned about, and we're wanting to reset this whole pattern. Right? We talked about these things already. Okay, and let's get down to the labs just a little bit. I'll spend like my 5 or 10 minutes laying out the schematic for how to interpret the labs, and then we can actually look at a few and interpret them and make it work, all right? So, ready for this? You got the lab test in front of you. You've got 3 things that you want to look at. Now, I'm going to do this first. So here's a Genova test. And there's this thing called active learning. So I've been teaching this mentorship class since 2006. And the way that doctors learn in that class, and it's the same if you do a boot camp with me, if you do the adrenal boot camp, we do the exact same thing. So if you sign up for, here, let me show you. And somebody's got to sign up for this so we can get you guys rolling here. If you sign up for this class here, okay, we have, an online curriculum that you get through, but then in class, you are going to send in your labs and we're going to interpret them in the live calls. And so you're going to see your own labs that you sent in and I'll help you interpret them. And then you're going to see labs from other students. And one of the things that happens is when we get a new lab in with a group like this, let's say it's it's just a pattern that no one in the group has ever seen before, and your brain is confronted with something that's not familiar, then you kind of are thrown into this state of disarray, like, well, I'm not really sure what that means. I need to figure this out. And when you get into that problem solving mode, and then we go through the lab and we do the problem solving in class, even if it's not your test, if it's some other doctor's test, that will stay in your brain for the rest of your career. Whereas if you just read about a certain pattern, I don't know, you probably forget it by that evening. Okay, so case-based learning by presenting problems that people don't know the answer to, really seems to be the key to getting clinicians up to speed. And I know for sure when I get a year with people in my mentorship class and they're reviewing labs like 3 or 4 hours a week for a year, at the end of that year, those people waltz into jobs anywhere from the Cleveland Clinic on down, just ready to go with their lab interpretation skills at like top in the field. And the reason for that is that how many people take the time to just focus and concentrate on 3 or 4 hours a week of reading labs that they don't understand. Then they have to go to my curriculum and look it up and go back and then struggle, right? So at that time of struggle that you spend trying to incorporate this information just gets seared into your brain in much different ways than if you just read a book about this stuff, okay? So I'm starting to appreciate this way of teaching more and more. For clinicians, I don't know if this would work really well if you're, I don't know, trying to do something else educationally or not, but for practitioners in functional medicine, this works extremely well. All right, so you're looking for 3 things. The cortisol awakening response, or CAR, cortisol awakening response, you see that right here? CAR, cortisol awakening response. You're looking for the DHEA level, which is right there, and then you're looking for the cortisol pattern or rhythm. 3 things: CAR, DHEA, cortisol pattern. Any one of these 3 that is out of range, not doing well, then you know that you have a problem with the HPA axis. So when you first wake up in the morning, you're supposed to have cortisol down here. It's supposed to go up and then right back down. Let's see if I can find a normal CAR. Sometimes we had a negative CAR in class yesterday. It's pretty cool. The doctor that submitted it was like, hey, I have a negative CAR. And everybody's like, no way. Yeah, it was negative 29. Negative 29. It's supposed to be around 50. You can have a negative one. It's kind of cool to see that. Anyways, so what's supposed to happen is your cortisol is supposed to be down here. It's supposed to go up and then drop right back down. That's called waking up in the morning. And the most important treatment for reestablishing the CAR, does anyone know what it is? I'm going to just pose that as a question. What's the most important treatment? Type it into the little chat box if you have a clue. Most important treatment for this. Okay, it's not a product. It's an activity. And I did it this morning. I think I've done this every morning this year with the exception of maybe once. It's called going outside when the sun is coming up. Okay, so our eyes are attuned to bright light, which is important to get around midday, around the noon hour. That's super important. But our circadian rhythm, this rhythm here, is set by our exposure to sunrise and sunset. If you go out in the middle of the day, you get bright light. That's very good for other reasons. But to reset the circadian rhythm, you have a special group of blue and orange sensing cells in your eye And when you go outside and you watch the sunrise and you're outside getting hit by hundreds of thousands of photons every minute or second or whatever it is, that sets this whole circadian rhythm in place and reestablishes a normal car. If it's cloudy, it still works. These, rays of the sun get through clouds. If you're sitting in front of a window, it does not work. You have to physically be outside. Now, not everybody is up like I am when the sun comes up. So as soon as they can get outside in relation to the sun coming up, the sooner the better. If they sleep until 11 a.m., this is not going to work, right? It's got to be as close to sunrise as you can get. You need like anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes is enough. 20 minutes is more. It's sums. They say it's a summation thing. So the longer you're out there, the better. 5 or 10 minutes seems to be enough for most people. 20 minutes would be better. And so what do? I just go out, watch the sunrise, and I do my little exercises, stretch this, that, for 10, 15 minutes, and I go back inside and I start my meditation practice. So it doesn't have to be a big deal. You could be walking your dog. You could be, I don't know, you could be reading if you wanted to, or whatever you want to do out. You could talk on the phone, whatever you want to do, but you physically have to be outside. And if you get patients doing that every morning for a couple of months, the resetting of the circadian rhythm is pretty profound. It helps to also be outside during sunset, but I find that's much harder to do. It's not quite as important. So I shoot for people doing sunrise every morning. Now, if they wake up at 7 a.m. and sunrise is at 6:30 and they're half an hour late, it's not that the end of the world. Just as soon as they wake up, they need to get outside for 5 minutes and get this circadian rhythm set. That's one of the most important treatments for the car and for the cortisol rhythm, right? Nighttime, it's important to have a dark room and all that, but the sunrise phenomena is the most critical part of all this. So then we also work on this with supplements. So we use DHEA to help with the low DHEA production. We use pregnenolone to help with the cortisol rhythms. And then there's a variety of different adaptogenic herbs and glandulars that you can use to try to reset the entire system as a whole. Okay, so we're looking for DHEA, the CAR, and the cortisol rhythm, those three things. And we'll come back to this test and do an interpretation of it in a second. But let's go back to our regular thing here. Here. There. 3 areas to focus on. Cortisol awakening response, cortisol daily pattern, DHEA. Here's a normal pattern. We wake up, and if you forget about the decimal point, I think it's easier to talk about this in other units. So we should wake up around a 20. You see that? 0.2. And then by bedtime, we should be down around around a 2. Okay, so we should wake up with 20 units of energy, 20 units of cortisol, and then by noon, it's down to like 10. And then when you go to sleep, it's down to around 2. It's a pretty big swing. And when you see what happens to people's HPA axis, the further away from this natural rhythm they are, the more dysfunctional their hormone patterns are, and that's going to impact their brain, depression, their immune system, getting colds and flus or all kinds of infections all the time. Oh, what about COVID? Yeah, not a good thing, right? So there's the immune function, there's brain function, there's blood sugar regulation. This is, this system's has a certain amount of control over glucose levels. Obviously, cortisol is a corticosteroid. So you got your metabolic syndrome, prediabetes, diabetes kind of people, people that can't sleep well, anxiety, autoimmune problems. I mean, it's pretty much an endless list of problems that develop when your cortisol rhythm is thrown off. A low slope, we like to call in the classes I teach a stage 3. That means, so stage 1 is high cortisol, stage 2 is dropping, stage 3 is low. So this is a low slope where we're going underneath what the ranges should be. And those people are generally exhausted and tired. And they're the kind of tired where if they like sleep, a lot for 3 days over a weekend, they're still really tired. This is not like, it's a tired you can't get yourself out of just by resting more. If you are really tired and then you just sleep for, through the night once and you're not tired, then that's a normal, healthy response, right? We're talking about people that can't do that. They can have other kinds of problems. as I mentioned a minute ago, whether it's something to do with PTSD or it's your immune system just kind of not doing well, then there could be what they call a high slope. This would be an overproduction of cortisol. It's extremely high, going up even more, right? And so it can either be high, and it could also go high when it should be dropping down. So that makes things even worse. And again, the more out of sync you are with the natural rhythm, the more problematic your health problems become, okay? And we'll look at labs in a minute, and then we're going to have some time for questions. So if you have questions, type them in. I'll get to as many as I can. This is what a cortisol awakening response is supposed to look like. It's supposed to be around a 50%. 50 is where they score these, plus or minus 10, you know, let's say. And when you first open your eyes in the morning, what's supposed to happen is within the first half hour, your cortisol is supposed to go up. Now that's going to happen if you go outside and are exposed to sunlight, especially, most importantly, the orange, yellowy, and blue hues that are emitted during sunrise. It's a whole special bunch of cells in your eyes that are detecting that kind of light, and those are the signals that set your circadian rhythm. If you go out in the middle of the day and you get bright sunlight, that is very good for you also, but it doesn't affect the rhythm that we're talking about. It's good for other reasons. Vitamin D, it's good for a lot of other reasons. Okay, so this is what a car should look like. And here's a blunted car. So instead of going up to a 50, it's just barely going up. The percent increases to 16. So not enough of an increase. Oh, you know what I read yesterday? This is in Tom Gilliam's book, is that I have a diagram, and I'll show you in a second. Then you can have an accelerated car, okay, as well, right? Exaggerated or accelerated car. All right, so let me show you what I was thinking about with Tom's. It's on this diagram here. Yeah. So there's another thing to think about. We're not going to talk about it today. I just want to point it out is that when you're under stress, you have the adrenal glands making more cortisol. They also are going to be making more catecholamines, norepinephrine and epinephrine. This happens at the same time. Catecholamines are also made in your brain. So we think of catecholamines as neurotransmitters, at least I do usually, but they're also made in the adrenal glands. So they're kind of neurohormones because when they're made in the adrenal glands, they're considered a hormone. When they're made in the brain, they're considered neurotransmitters. They're a little bit of both. So just to remember that you can use tyrosine when people are under stress to help with catecholamine production, which is the other half of this equation, in addition to this side here, which is the hormone side, right? Here's our HPA axis side on the right, and here's your nervous system on the left. Okay, so you can use dosages of tyrosine to help with the overall stress response. That helps with the neurotransmitter or neurohormone side, the catecholamine side, and can complement an adrenal program quite nicely. In fact, it is part of an adrenal program. It's just different part of the adrenals. So we make the catecholamines in the adrenal medulla, and we make cortisol obviously in the cortex, hence its name. Okay, so let's look at some labs. And let's see. Labs and then questions, right? All right, let's start with this one. 3 things. How's the car? How's the DHEA? What's happening to the cortisol rhythm? And then let's design a program. Okay, so here you go. The car should be around 50 plus or minus 10. So this is a blunted car. It's not going up enough. It's at a 15. So right away, you know there's an HPA axis signaling problem. DHEA is low. It's at a 56. It should be double or triple that or more. And then the cortisol rhythm is good and good, just barely, and good, but then sky high at night. It's gone extremely high at night. So now we want to design a program to reset this. Typically, when you see high cortisol at night, the person's not sleeping well. Typically, when the DHEA levels are low, their immune system is kaput and they're kind of a little maybe anxious, maybe depressed, maybe just exhausted all the time, maybe they have sugar cravings. Okay, so these things start to add up when your hormones are dysregulated like this. And let's see here, I have my little thing I pulled up ahead of time. There we go. So now remember we had that list of supplements to choose from. So now this person is low in DHEA. We're going to give DHEA. I like to use the liquid forms. And the liquids I use are 1.2 milligrams per drop. And so we would give, let's say, 4 drops 3 times a day. Then pregnenolone, that's the secret weapon in all of this. Pregnenolone is amazing and it helps high cortisol states, low cortisol states. It de-stresses people while energizing them. You can't say enough good stuff about it. 10 drops of that. And then there was a high cortisol at night. So you want to use phosphorine once a day only, because the only high cortisol was at night. And this is the one that lowers high cortisol. So this is, you would not use this if their cortisol levels were already low. But you would give phosphorine 1 to 2 capsules at dinner to knock that bedtime level of cortisol down. Then you want to use some kind of a multi that has vitamins, that has minerals, etc. We went over those earlier. I usually use a multi-pack, you know, once, twice a day, depending on what company you're using. Let's just put like X here, so you're going to take those throughout the day, maybe breakfast and lunch. Then a good program should have some extra vitamin C with flavonoids. And that's usually a 500 milligrams, so typical. And then there's options, you know, blood sugar regulation, blood sugar support, if the person needs it, but frequently they do. And then you have adaptogens, which I spelled wrong. Thank you, Google, or glandulars. So again, typically you don't do all of these things. You could pick 3 of them, 5 of them, depending on how sick the patient is and what's going on. Okay, blood sugar support is very often important, and there's certain patterns on the cortisol testing that show that you have to use blood sugar support. It's generally a good idea for pretty much everybody because cortisol is a glucocorticosteroid. So using the blood sugar support products can make a really big difference. And let's see, I don't know how many of you have seen a million of these labs before or not, but just show 1 or 2 others and then, oh, that one's not so good. Let's see what the other one looks like here. Yeah, this one's good. It's kind of tricky one a little bit. So the car is not bad. It's at 70. You know, we said 50 plus or minus 10. It's really not as bad as you often see. So a little bit of a problem there, but not bad. DHEA borderline low, and then this patient, the cortisols are running high all the time. Except for bedtime's almost okay, but basically this would be what we call stage 1 with high cortisols and low DHEA. So now, whenever you see abnormal cortisols at noon and afternoon, that's a key indicator that you want to use blood sugar control, blood sugar support. So then if for this case, this would get to be important. Blood sugar support, you would give that, whatever your favorite products are, you know. They had high cortisol, but not at night. I would just take the phosphorine out. That's kind of complicated. I wouldn't use that. And so their program could look something like this, but at a high cortisol state, you want to give less preg. So something like this. So you can vary these dosages depending on high or low cortisol states. You can vary the DHEA dosages based on how bad the DHEA levels are and what's happening with the cortisol. There's some ratios there that you can look at. You can use general products that are supportive, like vitamin C, blood sugar support, a multi-pack, and end up creating these customized programs for everybody once you learn how to interpret these tests. Okay, so if you guys are curious about this, you want to figure it out, join us for our special Genova class We put a lot of work into this, and Genova put a lot of work into this. It's not like these things just happen. So have you ever had a party at your house and you have like 30 people over and you're like cooking all day? It's kind of like that. We spent a lot of time getting this stuff ready for you guys. And then we're giving you a huge discount. We really want you to take this class because I want to teach you how to do this. And it's not very expensive. Nobody complains about the price on these, okay? So scan that QR code. The secret code for the discount is GDX24, saves you 400 bucks. It's starting in a couple weeks. It's a short class. It's like crammed into a month. Just teach you how to do this and get you out the door, get you on with your life, right? So that's what we want to focus on for you all for your next steps. And if you're more advanced, we have a more advanced class coming up as well. That's on our website. If this one seems too basic for you. Okay, so let's go for questions. So someone's asking with high DHEA, but cortisol really low. Who else has seen that? I don't know. Should I cover that? Do we have time? Yeah. All right. This is kind of an advanced concept, but somebody asked. What do you do? I guess the question here is, what do you do if cortisol's really low, but DHEA is high? What does that even mean? How could that even happen? Because we just said that the whole thing is based around cortisol is going up and then DHEA is starting to deplete. So here's what's really happening. So stage 1 is high cortisol, stage 2 is it's dropping, stage 3 is it's low. We just made those up. Dr. Timmons and I made those up. And I was there. I could tell you, it was like my son was just born. It was like 1999. It's 11:30 at Dr. Timmons' house, and I'm walking out the door. I say, okay, Bill, I'll see you in the morning. I know we got this 3-day conference coming up, and I was just starting to teach. He would put me on for like an hour after lunch when everyone's falling asleep. That was my time slot. But hey, I took what I could get, and so I'm walking out the door, and I said, hey, Bill, we've been teaching these correlation zones for a while now, and none of the doctors really understand it. Could we just have 3 stages of adrenal exhaustion? And he's like, okay. And I said, what would they be? He said, okay, well, how about high cortisol? It's dropping and it's low, and we're done. And we started teaching these 3 stages. But this is what he used to teach, and this is how I learned it, because this is really what's going on. I just turned it sideways by mistake. How did I do that? Yeah, okay. I don't even know how I did that. Well, either you're all going to have to turn your heads, or I'm going to have to do this again. Hang on a second. My Adobe Acrobat is like freaking out on me. Let me try that again. Let's see if I can do that. Every once in a while, I feel like my computer yeah, there we go. It has it out for me in some way. I don't know why that is. Okay, so the way that I learned this, and the way it was taught in the 80s and 90s was with these DHEA correlation zones. So there's 7 of them. Adapted to stress, adapted with DHEA slump, maladapted phase 1, maladapted phase 2, non-adapted, low reserves, high DHEA, and adrenal fatigue. And that's why that one night I told Timmons, nobody's understanding this, Bill. No one can remember what non-adapted low reserves mean. And can we just do 3 stages? So we started teaching 3 stages. That kind of caught on, but it's an oversimplification. So this person's asking, what do you do in high DHEA, low cortisol? Well, it's actually right here. I'm going to show you. So what happens when you're stressed? Cortisol and DHEA both go up. That's a normal stress response. See, that's zone 1, adapted to stress. That's a healthy person who's stressed out. Then DHEA starts to drop. That's this zone 2 correlation zone, adapted with DHEA slump. Then it gets really bad and DHEA is low. Now you got a problem. Then the cortisol starts to drop low, and this is what we call stage 3, low cortisol, low DHEA. What happens after that? DHEA shoots up and goes high. It goes even higher to zone 6, and then it crashes back down again. So if you see low cortisol and high DHEA, they're in a zone 6. And I'm sorry, this was like 30 years ago. What do we call zone 6? I forget. Oh, it's called high DHEA. That's easy. They're either in a 5 or a 6. They're in a non-adapted low reserves or a high DHEA state. Okay. You don't see that kind of lab very often, and the 3 stages I think work better as a patient communication teaching tool, but that's the explanation for that. Let's see here. So can you explain in simple terms what's methylation? No. No, I'm kidding. So methylation is just moving carbons around, and carbons are like the bricks of construction in your body. So if you want to construct, or you want to do something nice with your DNA, with your hormones, with your liver detox capacity, you want to break something down like an estrogen to get out of your body so you don't get breast cancer. If you want to make a neurotransmitter, so in order to do all those things, you have to be able to methylate properly. Okay. Um, and if you see a problem on, on DNA testing with methylation, it doesn't mean that they have a problem with it at all. If they have a problem on a DNA test, then you order a metabolomics from Genova and you look at their methylation. Just because the genes are present doesn't mean that there's a problem. And if you're treating, methylation defects based on a DNA test alone, then you're really screwing up. It's the opposite of what you're supposed to do. Yeah, you can't do that. If you are doing that, you should stop. And what you do is you can run a DNA test, and of course everybody does that, but then you have to run a functional test to see if that gene is expressing or not. And you can measure folate, B6, B12, methionine, all that stuff you test for. You don't prescribe until you see that on the test. Um, let's see. If they can't take licorice root and they have low cortisol, then you can use glandulars. They work really well. A lot of you got the whole sunlight thing right. I am impressed. There's like 10 right answers there. Thank you. No, there's more like 20. Oh, all right. Well, 10 points for those people. What's the most important treatment for adrenals? I would say sleep. Getting people to get good quality sleep. That's really what heals the adrenals more than anything. Yeah, if the person has any kind of tendency towards PCOS type things, you do not want to use DHEA. You can use pregnenolone instead, or still use pregnenolone. And yes, this does, you often see autistic kids that have GI problems. With autistic children, we don't usually do the hormone labs. If they're under the age of 16, you probably don't want to use the hormones that we're talking about. So this is treatments only for adults. Let's see. Do SSRIs affect the cortisol? Yes, they do. Yep. And so do other hormones, like thyroid hormones and whatnot. I took an adrenal course with you a couple years ago. Hey, Karen. Does it make sense to go through the new ones? I don't know. If you need a refresher, I'm kind of saying the same stuff, but the slides are maybe a little different. And these are inexpensive classes too, I don't think it's bad to do a refresher. I've taken every IFM course like 5 or 6 times. You always get something new when you take it again. Yeah, so low DHEA doesn't necessarily come up quickly. That's a complicated question. And that is correct. So that's Merdad. Tyrosine only helps with the brain part of this. It's not going to reset the HPA axis, but it does help people feel quite a bit better. So the best dietary approaches for any of these patterns is blood sugar control, blood sugar regulation. That's really what you want to focus on, okay? So phosphorine is like, I think they come in 100 milligrams, so use either 1 or 2 at night. And there are, if you have high cortisol and you want to use adaptogenic herbs, every company will have like cortisol calm is one company, Catacola Calm is another company. So if you have high cortisol states and you want to use some kind of herbal adaptogenic combination formula, just look or talk to your supplement sales rep or whatever. But the ones that I use are like Catacola Calm or Cortisol Calm. Those are for lowering high cortisol states. So you don't have to worry about individual herbs. You don't have to become an herbalist to learn how to do this because the companies formulate these for us, okay? Let's see. Oh, if phosphorine makes someone worse, I don't know what that means, but that's interesting. You'd have to do a more complex workup on them. That's not very common. Oh, by blood sugar support, There's lipoic acid, chromium, biotin, berberine. Those are kind of the big ones that are used frequently. Every company will have a combination formula for blood sugar support. There's metabolic extra from Pure. There's metabolic synergy from Designs for Health. Every company usually has like 2 or 3 blood sugar support products you can use, okay? So if you're combining an adrenal and a GI program, usually I would cut out all but the drops of DHEA and preg while you do the GI protocol, so the person's not on too many things. You always would want to use blood sugar support, such as more protein and fat in more meals. Yes, that is a given. For every one of these adrenal panels, you want to focus on dietary factors that help regulate blood sugar. And if their adrenals are really screwed up, you don't want to do intermittent fasting until they're starting to get a little bit better, okay? Because you want to have them do their 3 regular meals. And they can work their way up to the point where they're doing intermittent fasting for sure, okay? So a lot of blood sugar questions. So blood sugar control, it's probably, when I first started my practice, blood sugar regulation led to more symptomatic improvements than anything else that I did. I was really shocked by it. So if you're not doing blood sugar regulation with patients, it's something to really start to get into. And again, it's lipoic acid, chromium, uh, biotin. Every company will have a combination product that has those things in it. If someone has hormone positive cancers, you wouldn't want to use any of the hormones in the treatment, but you still can use the herbs and the blood sugar support and all these other things. Oh, and the pattern where you know it's a really well, every one of these cases you want to use blood sugar support, but the ones where you know it's extra bad is when the noontime and afternoon cortisols are abnormal. Not this case here, I'm just circling this. If this and this are abnormal, noon and afternoon are abnormal, that's a big blood sugar problem. So you use blood sugar support with everybody, but it's extra important when the noon and afternoon are off, okay? Let's see. You don't always have to do these protocols. I'm very much, you can do like lifestyle only for sure, but I'm really into labs. I mean, that if, I like labs and it just pushes people along so much faster. Life is hard enough. I don't know. Could I go grocery shopping on my bicycle? I could, and I have, and I do. And it's like 60 pounds, 80 pounds of stuff I have to carry up the hill. Is that like fun for me? Not really. It used to be, but not anymore. I could. So do I drive? Yeah, I drive. It's just easier. Could you do this all with lifestyle? Yeah, you could, but why torture people when you can get people better in 3 months, 6 months with some supplements, and then get them hooked on the lifestyle as you're doing that? It just speeds things along dramatically to do the labs. And it gives people the encouragement to eat better and start to exercise. It's just getting that person out of a hole that they've dug themselves in, okay? That's kind of what you're doing. Okay, there's too many questions, you guys. I'm sorry I'm not gonna be able to cover them all because we're out of time. Wow, tons of good questions here. I got to as many as I could. All right, so we have a couple things on offer. If you can join us, please do. Genova Boot Camp coming up in a couple weeks. Scan the QR code, and I'll see you at the next one of these. Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.